the rubble of broken walls and burned gates, what it illustrates is it illustrates the damaged and ruined areas of our lives that need to be rebuilt, restored, and revived. Does rubble in your life bring disgrace to God? So, well, hey, we've been studying the book of Nehemiah, and Nehemiah, if you saw what we did 2 weeks ago, we learned that Nehemiah had a prayer that he prayed. He was just deeply burdened by the fact that the walls were not built around Jerusalem. They had built the temple, but there were no walls there, okay? And so he's deeply burdened by this, and so he starts to pray. He starts to pray over the ruins of Jerusalem, but he's still in Persia, okay? And the point that we got out of this, and if you've got your notes that are in there, we got some notes, you can kind of pull those out and you can fill them in. The first one is this, that the rubble of broken walls and burned gates, what it illustrates is it illustrates the damaged and ruined areas of our lives that need to be rebuilt, restored, and revived. Okay, let me say that again. The rubble of broken walls and burned gates illustrates the damaged and ruined areas of our lives needing to be rebuilt, restored, and revived. Right? How many of you have those in your life? You probably do. Parts of your life that aren't the way you wish they were. They're not. You're not at peace there. There's some rebellion in your life over something that God wants you to do this, and you're not willing to surrender it. Maybe there's relationships that are struggling, and you're like, well, that's a problem. And so there's ruins, right? There's ruins. There's the walls have fallen, and there's an issue there. And so we're picking up in chapter 2, and here's what it says in chapter 2. Start right at the beginning, verse 1. It says this. It says, in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. Okay, let's stop for a second. It just said in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes. Why would God want to tell us that? He's given us the exact time that happened. Now, we just read in chapter 1, in the very first verse of chapter 1, if you go back to that, it said this. It said in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa. So what does that mean? It means back in December, okay? That's what Kislev is. That's December, back in December. In December, he got word from his brother that things were a mess in Jerusalem, okay? And he started praying about it, and it bothered him a whole lot. Now in chapter 2, we're in April. So what you're about to read is happening in April. In other words, 4 months have gone by since he heard this and was in distress and started praying. 4 months of prayer has happened where he's seeking, oh my goodness, what's going on? What's going on? How is this going to work out, right? It's important because it shows that Nehemiah has been praying, deeply praying, not the kind of prayers a lot of us pray. All right, so I'm going to make an assumption because I make these kind of prayers a lot too. Somebody comes and say, hey, Dustin, can you pray for this? Right? Like, okay, yeah, I'll pray for that. And I pray for it, but I don't have the kind of burden for it that you've got, right? Because I don't have that kind of burden, like the kind that makes me get down on my knees and stay there for 4 months, right? So I prayed about it, and then I go about my business, and then I might remember, if I have it written down, I remember it, and I pray about it again later, but that's not what this is. He is down praying, and he's serious prayer, and doing his job, praying on and on and on. He can't let it go. He can't let this prayer go. So that's one of the reasons that's in there. I'll give you another reason why that's in there. Because this has to do with what we're here in church for. This has to do with Jesus. Do you know this has to do with Jesus? This has to do with Jesus because this time, let me read a passage to you in the book of Daniel, chapter 9. It says this, in Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 to 26, it says, know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, isn't that what we're talking about right here? The word is going out, that he's going to take them out and they're going to build Jerusalem, right? It just talked about in Daniel, okay? There's a prophecy. It said from that time, it says, knowing therefore and understanding that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, that would be this date. That would be in the month of Nisan in the 20th year of King Xerxes. We just set a date for that. Says from that time to the coming of the anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks. Who's the anointed one? Capitalized anointed one. That's Jesus. That's Jesus, your Lord and Savior. So it's saying from the time that this happens, we're to go out and rebuild Jerusalem. right? Rebuild these walls from this time until the coming of the Anointed One. There shall be 7 weeks. Then for 62 weeks it shall be built again with squares and moat, but in troubled times. And after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. What was that about? Well, I'll tell you, there have been a lot of scholars who've worked a whole lot on this trying to figure out, well, what does that mean? And I'm not saying I got this all figured out. I think some of the guys, they're doing math and sometimes they're forcing it. But I will give you the truth that when you add this up and you put it together, it goes pretty close to when Jesus is here. Like really close. And some people have even gone as far as to put it to the actual day. I don't know. I'll give you an example of one of the math ways that they've done this. They say 7 years times 7, right? What's that? That's 49 equals 60, that's 49. And then you take the 62 weeks times 7. That gives you 434, right? So now you have 400. You add that with the 49 that you had before. So the total number of years they're talking about here is going to be 483. Just giving you the math that they give you. Now, in order to make this work, they have a prophetic year. They say a prophetic year is 360 days, right? They say that's what a prophetic year would be. So if you do that and you divide that by 300, or you multiply it by 360 as a prophetic year, you get 173,800 days. Okay? From the time this call goes out until the Anointed One will come. That's how many days if you do the math. If you divide that by what we call a year in the Gregorian calendar, which is 365, that's going to give you 476 years. What's the date that we started at? It was on the thing before, 444 BC. You add that 476 years and you come to 32.16, which is 32 AD, 0.16. Jesus. When Jesus is about to be crucified, or when he is crucified. I don't know exactly how that math works. All I know is I'm like, yeah. Oh, yeah. I like knowing that God knew ahead of time and was preparing us and telling us way back in the time of being in the lion's den times, right? Like Daniel times. Back then, he was like, this Jesus thing ain't an accident. He's going to come, and I'm telling you when it's going to happen. I'm going to give you the day. I'm going to give you the time. Pretty cool. Gets me kind of excited. Let's keep going anyway. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had not been sad in his presence, and the king said to me, "Why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of heart." Then I was very much afraid. Here's what's happened. You're not ever supposed to be sad in front of the king, right? The idea is that the king is such a wonderful guy and such a great guy, and he brings so much joy to the whole world, and he's just always sunshine and never darkness, that no one should ever be sad in his presence. And if you're sad in his presence, that's a great, great insult, right? That's a great insult to the king. It's like, you know what? I'm not even happy even though I'm in your presence. Tells you what I think of you, right? The other thing is this guy's a cupbearer. You know what a cupbearer's job is? Probably know a cupbearer's job. So the king, here's how there weren't elections back then, right? So you didn't get together and everybody vote and you say, all right, well, so-and-so's out, and now someone's. The way you got voted out of office is somebody offed you. Otherwise, they killed you, right? So they came and they poisoned you, or they hit you in the head, or they put a spear in you, or they did something, and then you weren't alive anymore, and the person that poisoned you or killed you would take your place, and now they're the leader, right? So when that's the way you are as a leader, you're always paranoid. You're looking around and people are like, what in the hell? Somebody's going. And so you hire yourself somebody you really trust that's going to be testing your food and stuff. And you're like, I like you, but I'd rather you die than me. And I trust you. So here, eat this pork chop. And they eat the pork chop and they don't die and say, all right, well, I guess I'm going to eat a half a pork chop, but at least I know it's not poisoned. Right? Or that wine, right? They go, slip them a Mickey, right? I don't know what that means, slipping somebody. You put something in there, slip in a little poison in the wine, and then they die. So this is a really trusted person, right? Nehemiah's got an important job. He's in with the king all the time, right? And the king trusts this guy, and he's telling him stuff. And all the time he's ever known him, he's always been smiling. I love you. You're all right. I like you a lot. He's always smiling. And now he's frowning. That's suspicious. That's suspicious. Right? Because if you're like, you're looking at me and you're like, oh yeah, now I'm not good with you. And then all of a sudden you're walking by me and you're frowning. Like all of a sudden, maybe you ain't on my side. Maybe you don't like what's going on here. Maybe I got to be suspicious of you. Maybe you're ready to put something in my drink. Maybe you're going to slip something by me. And so he's nervous about it. And so the king asks him, hey, what's going on? Why are you sad? At least he asked him and didn't just chop his head off, right? That was a nice thing for the king to do. They got a nice relationship, I guess. And he holds him. He says, well, yes, I'm sad. He goes, well, why are you sad? And here's what happens. Nehemiah is freaking out. He's nervous because the king knows something's wrong. And a lot of times when the king has somebody near him and he's not smiling, you just get rid of the guy. And so he's scared for his life. He's scared for his life here. And so it says, I said to the king, let the king live forever. All right. So Nehemiah is smart. Watch how Nehemiah runs this thing. Let the king live forever. In other words, I don't want you to die, right? That's not my intention. May you live forever. That's a little reassuring. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Now, here's the thing you need to know about Jerusalem, is that Jerusalem has been a rebel place all the time. So whenever somebody bring up Jerusalem to the Persians, they'd go, oh, those guys are rebels. I don't like them, right? Because they are always causing trouble, and they don't want to do what we want them to do, and they're kind of a mess. So instead of him going and saying, of course, because Jerusalem is this, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say that. Watch what he says. He says, why should not my face be sad when the city, he doesn't say Jerusalem, when the city, the place of my father's graves, lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire? I'm not even telling you it's Jerusalem. I'm just telling you, so, you Persians and you Egyptians, I know what they care about a lot. They care about like what happens to you after you die in your body in the afterlife, and they care a lot about your ancestors. And like the king like kings from dynasties down, they care a lot about that kind of stuff. You go to the pyramids and it's all ancestors, and they care about that. And so he knows that he's going to care about ancestors, and he's like, my ancestors, the place of my parents, like the pyramids for the Egyptians, the place of my ancestors where they're buried, it's been destroyed, king. It's been destroyed. And so the parallel here today is that the walls that separate us from the world, that's the parallel of these walls being broken down. The barrier between the world and God's people. It's hard to find that wall now. When we look at the walls that have been busted down, you go into churches and there's no wall between what's taught in public school and what's taught in your church. There's no wall that divides the way people that aren't Christian and those that are Christians think. They say the same things. The world is perpetuating all kinds of things that are evil and against what God says. And the church has just adopted and said, no, there's no difference between us and them. There's no wall here that divides that. It's a pretty sad state of affairs, man. It's a pretty sad state of affairs. Many in the church today don't know the difference between godliness and worldliness. They don't know the difference between godliness and worldliness because they get all their information from the world. They watch TV all the time and they listen to the news all the time and they just tell you, and they go to public school and they just tell them, this is what you should do. I'm not against public school. I'm not saying that. But there's a difference between what God says and the way God's people live and the way the world lives, and there has to be. And when there's not, you say, where's the wall? Where's the wall at? Well, the wall is just rubble. The wall has become rubble, and boy, we need to rebuild these walls. We need to rebuild these walls like Nehemiah. I'll say this also, just throw this in here. Nehemiah's answer, the king asks him a very specific question. He says, what's wrong? How are you doing? Basically. You ever have anybody at church or anybody around that they ask you how you doing, right? Somebody probably this morning said, hey, how you doing today? And what did you say to them? You said, oh, I'm fine. Well, are you fine? Maybe you were fine. Maybe you weren't fine. Nehemiah, if he doesn't say he's fine, can be killed. And yet he says, no, I'm not fine. Right? If you're not fine, I'm not saying air all your stuff out, but you don't have to say you're fine. Right? The church is filled with people that aren't fine. We're filled with people that are struggling and have issues that are going through stuff. It's okay to say, I'm not fine, and that's why I'm here. I'm here because I'm not fine. Now, I'll tell you something else, though, that we do sometimes, and I'll put this out there. Man, I'm losing a lot of time. I'm losing. Everybody's like, oh. A lot of times, though, what we'll do, and I've seen this a lot, somebody asks it, well, how are you doing? And then you'll say, well, I'm not fine, and this is what's going on in my life. And then you're doing that because you want some guidance, you want some help, you want some attention, you want some prayer, you want maybe a little bit of sympathy, right? But then what oftentimes happens is you ask for that and then they don't give you what you wanted, right? Because you have in your mind what you want to hear. I want you to say that this other person was wrong, or I want you to say that everything's going to be all right. I want you to, and you don't get that. So what you do is you go shopping and you find somebody else. You say, well, this is what happened to me. And so you throw that out there. And then they say, well, and they kind of give you the same answer. You go, oh, I didn't like that answer. So I go over here and I ask this person. Until finally 3 or 4 people down the road, you found somebody that agreed with you. Right? And they're like, oh, okay. Oh, yeah. You know what? You're right. That person's mean and nasty and is real. Don't go shopping. Don't go shopping. Right? Not a grocery store. So it goes on. It says, then the king said to me, what are you requesting? I love this. The king says, what do you want? Right? So I prayed to the God of heaven and I said to the king, if it pleases the king and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves. He doesn't even say Jerusalem again, that I may rebuild it. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him. Let me stop on that queen sitting beside him. I read that and I'm like, what? Why would they put that in? The queen's there. We don't know nothing about the queen. We don't know who she is. We don't know. It doesn't say that she's got lots of wisdom. But the queen's sitting beside him. I did a little research, and there is a decent chance that this is Queen Esther. There's a decent chance that this is Queen Esther. And if it's not Queen Esther, it may be Queen Esther's daughter-in-law. That's what I've read and studied. Now, whether that's true or not, but that would give a lot of reason that there's somebody that cares about this, that is in the presence of the king, and is there, he's maybe looking at his wife. She's like, oh yeah, you better, right? Or you better, right? He looks at his wife, and sometimes the wife's got a little more control than you think, and she's like, you gonna do that. You're gonna send him. And so the queen's beside him, right? And so it says, how long will you be gone? And when will you return? Great question. So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And I said to the king, if it pleases the king, let letters be given to me, to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah, and a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked for the good hand of my God was upon me. How did he know all this stuff? How did he know how to answer all these questions? I mean, there's specific questions asked here, and it's like, man, how did he know that? Right? Because he spent 4 months in prayer and thinking about it and kind of working through it. Right? Until finally God gives him the opportunity and he shoots up a quick prayer and says, all right, God, let it work here. He's asking me, and he gives him the stuff. Right? He had 4 months to plan, to rebuild the ruins. I'll put this in your notes. To rebuild the ruins of your life, you need to be honest, to honestly assess what actually needs to happen and determine the steps you need to take. See, some of us think, well, we'll just pray about it and then we don't do nothing, just wait for God to do stuff. But praying involves, all right, I'm going to pray and then God, give me the steps that I have to take. How am I going to be involved in this thing? So he says, how long is it going to take? Well, it says here, it says, I had given him a time. Right? How do you know how much time? Well, he didn't know how much time because he miscalculates the time horribly, right? But at least he gives a time. He'd been thinking about it. He didn't know for sure. He gives an answer, though. He knows he's going to need safe passage, that there's people out there that aren't going to, they're going to get him if he goes out there. He needs safe passage to protect him. He wants to protect himself. So it says, let letters be given to the governors of the province beyond the river that they may let me pass through. Right? If he had gone in there and didn't know to ask those things because he hadn't thought through it, that would have been really bad. None of this would have happened, but he was prepped. He was ready to go. It says he knew the materials he's going to need. If I'm going to build this wall, I'm going to need a lot of wood. And so he says, give me a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give timber. And then it's like he knew what had to be done, right? Because it says to make beams for the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. Hey, I want to be protected too, right? And did you notice that we're still before he's ever even gone to Jerusalem? Nehemiah has not ever set foot in Jerusalem in his life. He's never been there in his life. And he has been able to work this out and know what he needs just from spending all that time with God and hearing what his brother had to say and go from there. And so put this one on your notes. It says, to rebuild the ruins of your life, we need to actually do something. We need to actually do something, right? Too many people, they talk and they plan and they never ever do anything. And so let's look at this in verse 9. It says, then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. See, because he's prepared. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. But when Sanballat, the Horonite, and Tobiah, the Ammonite servant, heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. Right? Because they don't like Israel. Israel's rebels. They don't like that. And so what we find out is that when you begin to rebuild the ruins of your life, right? You've got issues in your life and you're struggling, you're reconciling relationships and you're getting rid of certain habits and you're not hanging out with certain people you were and you're a different person. When you start living for Jesus, what happens is when you start to rebuild the ruins of your life, there's going to be those who aren't happy about it. There's going to be people maybe in your family that aren't happy about it, that are going to even try to trip you up your own family, right? People that have been your best friends for a long time, they don't like it that all of a sudden you're doing a different life. You're living a different life. They don't like that. Keep going. Verse 11, I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few others. I had not told anyone that what God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem. There were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. By night, I went out through the Valley Gate toward the Jackal Gate and the Dung Gate. There's all kinds of gates, and they all got weird names, and they're for different purposes. One, Watergate, right? You know what's in Watergate? Nixon. You know what's in Valley Gate? Valley. What? Jackal. Dung Gate. Can you guess what's at the Dung Gate? What that's for? They got all these gates, but they're all ruined, right? And he examined the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved on toward the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool, but there was not enough room for my mount to get through. Why? Because it's just rubble. Right? How are we going to build if we can't even get to the foundation? How are we going to build if we can't even get to the foundation? It's all the rubble. We're going to have to clear out the ruins in our life if we're going to get to the foundation, which is Jesus. Right? If we're going to build our life on Jesus, you're going to have to move that stuff out of the way so that you can build a life on the foundation, which is Jesus. It goes on, it says, so I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the Valley Gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we're in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace. Why are they in disgrace? They're in disgrace because they're the chosen people of God. Okay, watch this. You're the chosen people of God that's been surrounded by all kinds of other nations who worship all kinds of other gods. All right? But you're the only people that God picked. He chose you, right? And He'd made promises just to you through Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob. This God had intervened just for you when it came to freeing you from Egypt. He had opened up the Red Sea, right? I mean, everybody knows all the wonders that God had done. Everybody says, wow, those people have an amazing God, right? Those people are amazing. Now, those very people, their city is rubble, and the people have been exiled. And God is silent. Their God's not talking. And they're silent, and it's rubble. And it was all about God, and now look what their God looks like. How embarrassing is that? How disgraceful is that? That the God that did all that before, now it's all. And why is it? It's because of the disobedience of God's people. But God is disgraced. It's disgraceful. Does rubble in your life bring disgrace to God? We'll finish up. It says in verse 18, I also told them about the gracious hand of my God on me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. Here's the last point I'll give you. To rebuild the ruins of your life, you need the help of those who share your concern. And so in my life and in your life, here's what happens. You have some issue. Maybe you have a sin that's in your life and it's rubble, it's ruin, and you're not able to build on the foundation of Jesus because it's there and it's in the way, right? And you're like, well, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Well, I'm not going to do this by myself. I can't fix this alone, right? I'm going to pray to God. I'm asking for power of the Holy Spirit, but I'm going to talk to my best friend. I'll maybe call my buddy and Brando. We'll sit down and we'll come up with a plan. This is how we're going to defeat this issue in my life. I've got this issue with this person, and every time they say this bugs me. And I'm like, So I sit down with somebody else and I say, listen, this is what's going on, and I know I'm wrong. This is ruining my life. How can I deal with it? Keep me accountable. Help me with this. I think God's calling me to this mission trip, and I've never obeyed Him. He's always been telling me to do this, and I've never obeyed Him. I just keep pushing Him off because I don't have the faith and I don't have the struggle. I know I can do it if I have some help. Would you help me to do that? Right? Because to rebuild the ruins of your life, you're going to need the help of those who share your concern. And so you find a trusted friend, somebody who cares, somebody who says, my best friend, I've come to him on multiple occasions and said, listen, this is an issue in my life and I see it's becoming a pattern and I'm struggling here. And he is as concerned about that in my life as I am. When he calls me, I am as concerned about that in his life as he is, because I love that man. I love him. I care about him. He is a great pastor. He reaches all kinds of people. But when that's a struggle, I want what's best for him because he's such a great friend, right? He's like a family member. I am equally concerned. And so when he comes to me, I'm like, yeah, together we're going to do this. Together we're going to make this happen. You don't got to do this stuff alone, right? You don't have to build these walls alone. Right? We're here as a church to help each other overcome all these things so that we can build a foundation on Jesus, to get rid of the rubble, so that we can build a foundation on Jesus. These walls are built, and there's a difference between the world and between us, and we're victorious in how we move forward, isn't it? Right? Yeah, that's what we want. That's what we want. Come on up here. We're going to close up here in a second. God, I thank you so much for your word. And God, we're going to take an honest look what the rubble is in our life. God, and these are some steps to remove that. God, some of us, we need to make a plan. We need to spend some serious time in prayer and make a serious plan, step by step. This is what we're going to do, and you might change the plan. God, but we're going to try it. We're going to work on God, we're not going to do this alone. We've got other people that we can trust and that we love. God, we're going to rely on them to help us. We're going to share where the ruins are, take ownership like Nehemiah did. Say, listen, together we need to do this, and this is how it's going to benefit me. This is how it's going to benefit God. This is how it's going to benefit this kingdom. God, I pray that you'd work in our lives and help us to make the decisions we need to make. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
And can carry me. How I love you. All I am is you, King of